What's up guys? Today we're going to be taking a look at the Sochi Autodrome ahead of this weekend's Russian Grand Prix. We're going to be going around it on the sim with the new gear. If you haven't seen that video, I will link it up in the corner, up here. Check that out. But the new Fanatec gear is awesome. It's going to help us on this journey around this particular circuit. We're going to be stopping at various corners, looking at what's happening to the car from an engineering perspective around this track, because this has a number of unique features, this circuit, different to any other circuit we go to, and therefore a set of unique challenges that go along with that. So we'll stop all the way around looking at the various challenges and points around the lap, and then we'll go for a hot lap at the end. So strap yourself in, get the gloves on, and let's do it. Here we go then. The exit of the final corner heading onto your lap is absolutely crucial, because we head onto what is one of the longest straights in Formula One, even though it's not actually straight. It's got this big corner, turn one, right in the middle of it. DRS opens there, and then we go round this right-hander, which is flat out in a Formula One car, not even noticeable as a corner. But what you must do is make sure that you take the path of least resistance around that corner. Any tyre scrubbing with the tyre sliding as you put too much steering input in will just scrub off speed that will cost you all the way down here towards the big braking zone of turn 2. Okay, so with the car massively loaded up with aero, we hit the brakes quite late, just around the 100-metre mark. One of the biggest overtaking opportunities on the circuit, this. Keeping the car as much in a straight line as possible when we brake, so that both front tyres are level, are equally loaded, so we don't snatch a wheel. There is a tiny amount of adverse camber. You can see it just ahead of me with the circuit falling away to the left-hand side. So very easy to introduce understeer as we head into this right-hander. Very, very tight. The overtaking opportunity is on the lunge on the way in. Then as we get out, it's about getting back on the power as early as possible, getting your foot planted without wheel spin, launching over these curbs, avoiding the sausage curb, because that will unsettle the rear and stop you getting the power down. And then we're back hard on the throttle, heading into a corner that is not replicated anywhere else on the calendar. Turn 3 just goes on forever and ever and ever. And whilst this is a circuit that's not really very hard on tyres, this left-hander here, because it's flat out, you're accelerating all the way through here, hugging the inside line as best you can. The right front tyre now is starting to be punished. It's starting to build temperature. The car's leaning on it, wanting to understeer, but you want to accelerate as a driver, so you're pushing and punishing that right front tyre all the way through. But winding up through the gears, flat, hard on the throttle all the way, and immediately, as soon as you can, straighten the car up, again for that straight line braking into turn 4. Pretty much a 90-degree right-hander this one. It's about clipping curves but not using too much. Get the power down as early as you can onto this short straight down here. Lots of bursts of straights, big stop. Again, turn 5, another 90-degree right-hander. Get your braking point and turn-in point as critical, as crucial and as accurate as you possibly can, because getting offline just the tiniest bit will compromise you as you head on to the next blast of power. With this one, let's look at this corner here, because this is quite a tricky one. Turn 6 and 7 are really quite tricky, because 6 is almost a nothing corner, you don't really notice it, but what you're doing here is flat, hard on the throttle, as hard as you possibly can, aiming for that white section of wall right ahead of you. Now that feels unnatural, but that's what you've got to do. Keep the throttle buried as late as you possibly can. Aim for that corner, aim for that wall rather, and then what you're doing is braking and turning at the same time. That's always tricky in a Formula One car, because as soon as you put steering input in, the geometry of the car tips it, pitches it over to one side, unsettles and unloads, or unbalances rather, the loading between the front tyres. Now, if you're braking and the front tyres are unloaded, there's a very high chance of you locking one of those front tyres. So maybe on the way into this corner, the drivers will make a quick change on the steering wheel to make a little bit of a brake bias adjustment, put a little bit more braking towards the rear, take a little bit of pressure off the front brake system, just to alleviate the risk of locking that front tyre. But as soon as you get out towards the wall, it's turning in, back on the throttle again, making a V shape out of that corner, clipping the curb, and then again we're back onto the throttle for another burst of power. Now these next two corners sort of blend into one, or you have to try and blend them into one. So pull the car over to the right hand side, again jumping on the brake, still as we're starting to turn, you're still on the brake, so leaving that brake bias a little bit more towards the rear from the corner prior to this one. Turning in, trying to round the whole thing off and making it, instead of 2 corners, just 1 big corner, but you're early back on the power. The weight transfer starts to throw towards the rear, which helps you get traction down, but does start to introduce a little bit of understeer to push you out towards that that blue and green wall to the right hand side. On the brakes again, another 90-degree right, again crucial to get in here, and then on the power as early as possible. The exit of this corner just as critical as the first corner or the last corner of the lap heading onto that start-finish straight, because now we go onto a relatively long section of power and another DRS zone. So a little bit like at the start of the lap, we've got a DRS zone. It opens just about here. There we go. DRS open whilst you're going round the corner. Shouldn't have too much effect. You're still buried hard onto the throttle, hugging that right-hand wall as best you can, but the exit you can see is crucial. This is a circuit that punishes those teams that are not good in a straight line. Ferrari, Red Bull have always struggled here. In fact, if you're not Mercedes, you're not doing well here traditionally. Might suit Renault this time because of all these slow speeds corners, particularly this final sector. The final sector of the lap is frustrating from an engineering perspective. I think it's frustrating from a driving perspective as well, because it's very difficult to make up a huge amount of time. It's lots of very slow, really tight and twisty corners, very street circuit-like. But it is really easy to lose a lot of time. And you've got to balance your setup. You need something a bit more compliant in the car to bounce over curbs and to get the car turned in through a series of very quick, short and slow corners, balancing that against the need for the really long straights and power sections that this circuit is kind of dominated by, I guess. So the car's not really set up for this final sector, but you need to have a decent amount of compromise within your setup underneath you so that you don't lose time through this vital last part of the lap. So this corner here is another really tricky one in that you're braking and turning at the same time. So same as before, a little bit of brake bias towards the rear to take the pressure off the front axle, because you're turning into this left-hander as the DRS closes. When you jump on the brakes, you're turning to the left and trying to brake. You're trying to straight line this as best you can, but inevitably you have to turn a little bit round to the left to open up the tight right-hander that's coming. So over to the left-hand side, braking in as straight a line as you possibly can, probably down to 3rd gear, I would say, avoiding the curbs through this sector. They are punishing curbs and will launch the car. But look, we're over here at this point. Immediately we've got to get the car back over to the left-hand side. We don't want to scrub too much off these tyres at this point, because the final part of the lap can really start to kill the tyres in terms of temperature, something that doesn't happen at any other part of the lap. Over to the right-hand side, turning in. Now look at what happens to the circuit. If we look right ahead of us, you can see the camber, the circuit just falls away in front of us. Now what that wants to do is introduce understeer as we come over the crest of this left-hand turn, and the circuit falls away over to the right-hand side. We're trying to turn left. The car wants to push on. The understeer wants to push the car over towards that Lukoil banner over there. Now we can let it run out to a certain extent because we want to be to the right hand side, but just look at the camber of the road, you can see it there ahead of us. But we've got to also stay within track limits, keep it on the black stuff, and get around this left-hander without the car sliding away to the left. The next corner, equally as tricky, because look what's ahead of us. We've got a tight turn in on the left. There's not really any reference point to turn in. You can barely even see the apex. And we're also coming over a massive crest. This is where the setup of the car needs to be compliant enough in the damping and the spring rates to accept the massive changes of direction where the car wants to wallow around. You want to keep it as level as possible, but you've also got to have compliance to deal with the very quick changes of direction and the curbs that you're inevitably having to leap over here. This crest here, the car wants to go light. Just as we reach the top of that, we unload all 4 tyres right around the apex, which means it goes light, it loses grip, and it really wants to slide off towards the barrier over to the right hand side. But what we need is to turn it in massively to the left hand side and get the car over ready for a right hand turn coming up. So this is about being patient as a driver. You've got to take this much slower than you really want to in order to set up the next corner. You're going to be heavily reliant on your car's anti-roll bars, the things that that limit the amount of roll in the car as it goes through sections like this. What you don't want is the thing wallowing around from side to side like a boat, because then you massively load up one side of the car and unload the other. And when you swing it back to the left-hand side for this right-hand corner, you're going to do the same. You're going to overload the left-hand tyres, massively unload the right-hand tyres, and when you jump on the brakes, you're going to lock tyres, you're going to spin the tyres up when you start to get onto the power as well. As we come through the right-hander, and bear in mind by this point, we're all about braking and traction around this circuit. We're starting, if we've not managed tyre usage perfectly well, we're starting to light the tyres up really easily out of some of these slow corners onto blasts of power. If we light the bags up too much, of course, the surface temperature has a massive spike and can quite easily overheat on a circuit that for the rest of the lap, really quite easy on tyres. Exit out of this one then, really crucial as well. Probably some work changing around diff settings over the course of Friday, working out what the diff will be doing at different parts of the circuit. How open or how locked will the differential be, will be a key to getting the power down out of some of these corners. Well, if the car's still turned, you're starting to apply power, you need the diff to have the right amount of diff locking. That can be changed for certain corners at different times of the lap automatically. That will be another part of the workload going on Friday to get that right. So drivers can play with that diff locking as well through a switch on their steering wheel. They can change that as they need it, but hopefully the amount of diff locking they get right by the time it gets to Saturday, we can get the power down without spinning up the rear tyres to close out the lap with a couple more 90-degree right-hand corners. In we go, over those curbs again, avoiding the sausage curbs, running out wide, and again, I talked about it at the start of the lap, this last corner, so crucial for two reasons. First of all, because on a normal lap, starting into a qualifying lap, we've got that incredibly long straight, of course, but just look what happens as we come round the final corner. Turning in, running out wide, again, we're still turning the corner. On a qualifying lap at the end of our quali lap, we need to get the power down as early as possible, earlier than you might think possible, because just look where the timing line is, right there, almost before the end of the exit of the corner. So you can come out this corner with a little bit of snap of oversteer, it doesn't matter, as long as you get across that line in the most efficient, quickest way possible. Getting the power down earlier than you think is possible at all for the car, you need to just launch across that line. So any wheel spin really, and you're starting to lose time before you hit the timing line, in a race or a qualifying situation, you lose time all the way down that straight, which is going to punish you. This is a circuit, as I say, tyre wear is not really an issue. Building tyre temperature can be an issue at certain parts of the lap. Maybe Mercedes' DAS system will really come into play here and have an advantage for them. But the end of the lap is where you risk overheating tyres if you punish it through the slow start-stop nature of the very tight, twisting 90-degree bends. Now that is a lap of the Sochi Autodrome. Let's see if we can go and do a hot lap. So there you go. It's a tricky lap, actually. The first two sectors, not so much, but that final sector is so treacherous and such a balancing act, both in terms of driving and in terms of getting the car set up. So there's going to be lots of work around that, balancing your aero load, balancing your mechanical grip level, the compliance of the suspension, all to work out how much you should associate towards the first two sectors, where you need the speed and the 90-degree corners, the traction under traction and braking events, and then that really tricky final sector. How much compliance, how much softer do you need to go on the suspension, roll stiffness, and on the actual spring and damper settings too, to accommodate those bouncy curbs, quick changes of direction through that really tight sector at the end there. So very difficult, very challenging. It's a really smooth surface. The tarmac is very, very smooth. So as I said earlier on, difficult to initially get tyre warm up for the early part of the lap, unless perhaps you can use your DAS if you're Mercedes. But then towards the end of the lap, you really do have to manage not spinning the tyres under traction to then overheat the surface and cost yourself massive amounts of time. So a difficult one, a tricky one. Mercedes have won every single race we've had at this racetrack. I expect nothing different this weekend. Have a good one, guys.
I'm going to make another coffee. You want one? Can I have a go?
You actually want to go?
Yeah.
So this one changes up.
What do you mean up?
Changes your gear. You got to press the pedals.